My name is Isabel Robinson, and my question, so one of the things, so Kathleen asked us to talk about a few different things that I think will shape what you hear from us today. The first is how we got to our question, what our question was, how we got to it. She wanted us to talk a little bit about our methods and our methodology, victories, challenges, how we persevered, overall outcomes, and then give you some tips on relationships. So my question really centered around the relationship between self-efficacy and dissent among college student organizational members. I was interested in figuring out that relationship because I wondered what made some people dissent and other people not dissent. And we had a speaker come in, Sarah Stitzlin from the University of Cincinnati came into, I want to say 764, Democracy and Education, and she talked about the importance of teaching students dissent. And I thought that was a really intriguing topic. And around that time, not at the same time, because once I started the PhD program, I stopped reading for leisure. So before that, I read Outliers by Malcolm Gladwell, and he talks a lot about 10,000 hours with this. And so I started sort of trying to figure out how do you get people to dissent. I was also in several meetings, administrative meetings, where I noticed people weren't dissenting, and so I was like, tell me, and then the meeting would end, and then it'd be the meeting after the meeting, and then people would have all sorts of things to say, and so I'm like, why didn't you say that in the meeting? So I wondered if it had something to do with their self-efficacy, and then I needed a group to study. So I thought students would be a good group to study. There is a certain amount of convenience that is helpful when you look at a student population. They're also 18, which is another matter of convenience that I was considering. So I looked at student organizational members. Initially, I was going to look at organizational presidents, but then through the process with my committee, we decided that it would be better to have a more broad student organizational involvement, not just one particular unit. So that is what I did. I chose to do a mixed methods study, in part because my quantitative, so my very first class was the Intro to Qualitative Research. That was the very first class I took in the program. And that seemed like eons ago when it was time to actually sit down and do my dissertation. And my quantitative stuff came later in the program. And so for me, all of the thinking that I was doing at that point in the program was quantitatively based, and so and then I wrote my questions, and Dr. Quantz told us to write, so for those of you who haven't taken the, so I'm in LCC, those of you who haven't taken the capstone, the last class, part of what Dr. Quantz does is he has us do like a pre-proposal, and then part of what you're supposed to do is like write your questions and figure out sort of what methodology you're following. And so I did that thinking I was using different methodology than in fact I was using, and he was like, these are all quant questions. So I was like, okay, we'll go with quant then. So, and then I added some different questions to do a little bit more qualitative stuff. But I say all that to say that I think how my coursework fell really informed and shaped what sort of I got to at the end when I started researching. So so I did mixed methods. So I had basically 3 questions. The first was, what is the relationship? The second was, is whatever the relationship consistent across different student organizational members? So is it the same for presidents and treasurers? All that. And then the third was, how does this sort of look, or how do students experience it outside of their student organization, which was more of my qualitative question. And what I found was, because it's fun, I found that there is a negative correlation between the relationship between self-efficacy and dissent, which is not what I expected to find. I reran the data like a whole bunch of times, and then I came up with a different solution, and then that it was the willingness not to not dissent. That's what I convinced myself one Sunday afternoon. I was like, it's the willingness not to dissent. And I went to bed on that and everything, and then I had this dream of my committee looking at me like they were quiet. So I had reread the instrument and tried to figure it out, and then I was like, oh no, it really is a negative correlation. So basically what that means is the higher one's level of self-efficacy, the less likely or the lower their participation in dissent. And that was really, really fascinating. And then I started to sort of wonder why that occurred. And it's great that there are a lot of people like, what? Like I could see it in your face. It's like, that doesn't make any sense, which is the best sort of response ever, because it made for a really interesting dissertation. So in short, I think, just real quick, I know we weren't supposed to necessarily do this, but I think people don't see saying something as the same as doing something. And so if you feel like you can do something to solve your problem, you don't dissent, you just solve it. But if you feel like you can't solve it, then you feel like you have to get somebody else to help you solve it. So that was my sort of big finding. So it's all, our dissertations are uploaded on OhioLink now, and I can go into more of the things that sort of the time doesn't, but what the time doesn't allow us to do that. But if you want to download it, I am eagerly counting the number of downloads. So feel free to download it as much as you want.
Yeah, I'm sold.
It was a lot of fun. I really was concerned about picking a question that I was going to hate, because that's what everyone was saying. Like, whatever you pick something you'll love, because by the time you're all done with it, you're gonna absolutely hate it. And I never had that feeling about my question. So I encourage you to pick something that you really, really like, because you will get to know it intimately. And if you pick something that you're only lukewarm about, or something that someone else is excited about and you're not, then that'll be really hard to write about. So let's see, talked about my method. So I did a mixed methods. I did interviews. First of all, I did a survey. So I used 2 surveys, a survey on generalized self-efficacy and a survey on organizational dissent, and I merged them together, and I added some other questions because I wanted demographic information, and I sent that out to students. I sent it out to a survey group of about 2,500. After much discussion with my committee, we settled on 2,500. I did a $150 participation drawing, so that netted me about 600 students that participated in my process. And then that was the first part, and then for the second part, which both served as qualitative support for the survey questions, as well as information related to the third question about dissent inside and outside of their student organization. The students, there were 4 students that participated in that part. 4 students, 3 interviews each, and they each got a $50 gift card. And I did get funding from the graduate school for that, so I would encourage you to apply for graduate school funding. They did not fund all of it, but they funded enough of it that it was super duper helpful.
EDL has funding too.
EDL has funding too. And I also had to buy a recorder. I hadn't done that, so that's another space where you can get some support funding. Mine was like $30, but let's see. Victories. So I had a really great committee. I think your committee is really important. I had a really responsive committee. In case you're wondering, my committee was Dr. Kathleen Abowitz, in addition to Andy Saltz, Mahogany Shaw, and then Amity Noltemeyer, who was my outside person for med psychology. She was great to work with as well. So they were very responsive, which was helpful. And Kathleen was really great about being very responsive, and so that was tremendously important. As I've talked to other people who aren't necessarily here at Miami, but in other programs across the country, they talk about their advisors hanging onto their work for a really long time. And when I say a really long time, like 4 weeks, 6 weeks, stuff like that, which is not an experience that I had. So that was a victory, not a challenge. I think that
I was just going to say, you reconstituted your comps committee from your dissertation.
I did.
You don't have to talk about that, but I just wanted to point it out that some people want to do that because,
yes.
And it's okay. So.
Yeah, so I had Dr. Petter and Dr. Reams were on my comps committee, and they were not on my dissertation committee. Dr. Saltz was not on my comps committee, but he was on my dissertation committee. And my decision around that, in part, was that I was doing a quantitative study, and I wanted to make sure that my committee was comfortable with quantitative analysis. And so Amity served as a quantitative outside person, and then Andy as a quantitative inside person. Mahogany, I selected her because I was looking at college students, and I was looking at leadership, and those were 2 of her areas. So, and then Kathleen's awesome, so she got to stay the whole time. She's been my advisor since the beginning. So it never even crossed my mind that I would switch advisors. I remember the conversation. I was like, so we gotta have a conversation, and she was like, well, if you want to change, I was like, you're with me, sorry. So let's see. I would say the hard the harder parts of the actual research process, the statistics was a little bit challenging because I didn't know. I watched lots and lots of YouTube videos. I'm like, how to run this, and what does it mean, and how do you write it up? And even though I had classes on all that stuff, it just was nice to have it right in front of me as I was doing it. And then for the qualitative part, transcribing, I transcribed my own data. And that was painful. I mean, really, there's no way to say that it wasn't painful, but what's helpful is Chloe was doing it at the same time, and she's all qual, and so she was doing it a lot more than I was, but it was nice to have somebody kind of going through the process at the same time, and we could push each other. But I chose to transcribe my own information in part because I wanted it done quickly. I was eager to keep moving, and I'm really, really cheap, and I did not want to have to pay somebody to do that. And the rate I would have paid them, like, I'd still be waiting for my results because it's cheaper the longer they can take, and I didn't want to spend a lot of time doing that. I got to know my data pretty personally, pretty intimately. I transcribed right after each of the interviews, so I would spend the weekend trying to transcribe. I recommend that you all do it for your dissertation. I don't know that I'll ever do it again. I think that after that experience, I would rather someone else do it, but I do think it's a good thing to do for your dissertation, depending on the number of interviews that you have going. It made my coding easier, it made seeing themes easier because I was so intimately connected with it, and I really just interviewed them, and then, so I would interview my group or whoever I happened to interview, and then I would transcribe as quickly as possible so that by the time I had their next interview, their stuff was still in my head. And that was helpful. So, yeah, I think my relationships were good. My husband's very supportive. I have a partner and children. They're very supportive people. I probably was short with them a few times because I'm like, why are you coming and talking to me right now? But they understood what I was doing, and they've been troopers the whole time. I also made myself stop doing stuff like, okay, I'm not gonna. This is really. It's okay for me to take a break. It's okay for me to not do this right now. I tried to. So I continued to go to church. I continued to see my parents on a weekly basis. I obviously was working full time. So I did all of those things in addition to it. I have a great boss, so that was a big part of it. People ask me like, oh, how'd you manage it all? I have a faith base, and that my faith base, my belief in God was tremendous in this process. I have a supportive spouse, and then I have a super boss. And so people are like, oh, do you think I can do it? I'm like, do you have these things? Because I don't know if you can.
Do you believe in God? Because that is pretty
Yeah, I'm not saying you have to believe in God. I'm just saying that helps me. Those are my talking points. I will turn it over.
That's good. I think a lot of those same things about transcribing and I didn't want to remember it. Well, so everybody gets through this differently, right? So we were joking up here about like, but I could never speak like she just did without looking at all my notes. So I'm gonna have a lot less eye contact. So my question focused on veteran elementary school teachers. I was an early career elementary teacher before I came to the program full time. And so I'll talk about how I got there, but my question was how veteran elementary teachers narrate what it means to be a teacher in the context of accountability reforms. Primarily, I was looking at post No Child Left Behind. And so how I got to it, I wasn't somebody who came to the program with a clear vision of what I was going to study. It was a struggle all the way until Dr. Ponce's class when I had to have the question. So if you're like me, it's okay. I still figured it out eventually. And so I knew that I wanted to study teachers and accountability all along. I hoped that veteran elementary teachers' experiences would somehow illuminate how they were able to resist reforms that they've seen come and go over their whole career. But that wasn't necessarily the case. So I think I didn't realize that until at the end of my dissertation when I was writing things up why I actually chose veteran elementary teachers, and I realized I think I was kind of looking to them for I don't know, a way to do things differently, because coming in as a new teacher I was pretty compliant, and so I just hoped that people who had seen all these different reforms over the course of their career would maybe be able to offer some insights that were different from my experiences. So my methodology, I situated my study within an interpretivist discourse using Dr. Kwanz's language, Dewey pragmatism specifically. And then for methods, I had 5 veteran elementary teachers, and those were teachers who had 15 or more years of experience. And they were in Ohio, and I interviewed them and observed in their classroom. And so I used Pinar's Carrere to scaffold our interviews. And so the first interview was the regressive moment, so we talked about their past. The second interview was the progressive, so we talked about their projections for the future, and then the analytical and synthetical moments, if you're familiar with Pinar and Carrere. So that was a big part of my study, and so the classroom observations just kind of added more nuance to our interviews. So I would come up with questions sometimes from our classroom observations, or if they would say that they really believed this thing, but in practice it looked kind of different, I would somehow try to bring that into the interview. But most of the time our interviews were started with just a broad narrative-inducing question rather than a list of questions. The process for me, victories, challenges, and how I persevered. Victories, I'm big with deadlines and to-do lists. I was full-time, my husband was really busy, I don't have any little ones at home, so I feel like, it was pretty simple for me to stay in my apartment and just work this thing out, which I know is not everybody's situation, but it might be some of yours. So for me, I work well with deadlines, but I have to tell people what those deadlines are. So I would tell my committee member, and Vicka and I kind of had this May deadline. We wanted to graduate together. We even made a hashtag, working hard for that selfie. So we'll put, we would check in with each other, especially during transcription, and 600 and some pages later, I got it done. That's how many pages I transcribed. So yeah, I had 20 interviews total, five participants, 4 interviews with each one. So that was a lot of transcribing, but I echo all of what you said, especially the part where I was very intimately familiar with those conversations. We had the conversation, and I listened to the conversation, and I was transcribing, and so yeah, when it came to analyzing, I was doing that throughout the whole process, not at the end. And so that kind of allowed me to move more quickly through the process, but not that quick is better. So other victories, I built relationships with each of my participants that I felt enabled me to, some of them, one in particular was very vulnerable with me. It came up in my defense whether you can really know if someone was honestly reflecting in your interviews. Thank you, Kathleen. But, so I'm not going to say that I felt like they were all honest, but I do feel that they were willing to talk about some things that were maybe difficult for them. So I counted that as a victory. They all participated in member checking processes. Once I wrote up their narrative, I sent it to them for feedback, and so they all gave me feedback, and we kind of went back and forth, so I thought that was a victory. 4 of the 5 participants reflected that the research experience participating in the study illuminated insights for them about their teaching identity that they had not previously realized. And so for me, that, as a researcher, a newbie, that was a victory. And then lastly, I guess I didn't really expect this, but I learned about myself in the process as a beginning researcher and also as a teacher too. And that kind of gets me into a challenge. My committee wanted from the very beginning to see more Chloe, and I heard that in my different classes too, especially when I was in the curriculum windows class with Tom when we were writing the chapter, more Chloe, where's your voice? And so I thought about that through this process, just like how do you, I don't know, I think my classes before this program kind of kept me out of it, and so I had a hard time figuring out how to put my voice in, and that was a constant struggle. And so one of the chapters in my dissertation that my advisor wanted to see was my own Carrere, and that was the hardest chapter, second to the last chapter, that was the hardest chapter. But the chapter about myself and kind of owning my researcher positionality was a challenge for me, but helpful. And then of course, another challenge is that the dissertation is a really lonely process. I was full-time, and I was the dissertation scholar, and so I had no other responsibilities on campus, I was very appreciative of it, but I had to be more intentional about seeing people and getting with people and reflecting through the process. And so now I'm back done with done with it all, and I kind of feel like I'm in the same place where it's also lonely when you finish too. But it's exciting. There's always the challenge of feeling like you're an imposter. We talk about imposter syndrome. I still feel that, and I felt that throughout. And so one of the things that helped me was reading other dissertations, but I had to be careful because I would read these chapters and I was just like, mine does not sound like that at all. Like, I don't think I can ever set apart, oh my gosh, they cited so many more texts, and I don't even have a fourth of that. And so you have to be careful. It's helpful to read other dissertations. I would definitely recommend it if you think that that's a particularly good chapter and you want to kind of mirror yours off of that or take some things from that. Just be careful that you don't, constantly beat yourself down and compare yourself. Exiting the research site was a challenge just because I had built relationships and I felt like these teachers were pretty vulnerable with me, and I had read that would be difficult, and so I don't know if I did a good job with it, but I just feel like, we kind of cut ties, and that was hard because they kind of became like friends, and I didn't ever want them to feel like I was just using them for data and for my study and for my benefit. How I persevered, I think I kind of already talked about these. I'm big with deadlines, deadlines with my committee members. I would tell them I want to have my proposal to you by this date, and so I would never want to back out on that. And so kind of helped me accountable. And then deadlines with my participants too. We would work out schedules, but they were flexible because they had kids and whatnot. But we always started with a deadline, and we tried to stick to that, and they appreciated it too. I kept a running to-do list, of course. This was a big tip that I wish I would have done on all my texts, but when I was in my coursework and then when I was doing my reading for comps, I kept detailed digital notes on everything that I read. And I can't stress that enough if that is how you think. Maybe you're able to read things and remember it, not me. And so when I came to writing my literature review or doing different parts of, different chapters for my dissertation, I could Control F on my computer, like this word or this author, and boom, all of my notes that were relevant would pop up. And so that saved me a lot of time. And some of my books that I checked out from the library that I didn't underline in, that I just had post-it notes or that I'd already turned in, it took a lot longer to try to remember what I had read and what I wanted to use. So for me, taking notes made reading take a lot longer when I was in my course. Had used Carrere in her dissertation, and so we spoke on the phone about how she used Carrere, and she challenged me, and it was kind of like she was an honorary committee member, even though she didn't really sit on my committee. So that was helpful to actually not just read her dissertation, but talk with her about it. Just little things like completing the IRB process when it's the slower season. Like you can look on their website and they'll tell you when it's really busy. And so when you go through that, I did it in the summer, and so I heard back in 5 days. And so just little things like if you're really wanting to stick to a deadline, those are little things that I thought, well, no one told me that ahead of time, but I would want to know. And like Becca said, she was good at taking breaks. I wasn't so good at taking breaks, but I did try to celebrate each success along the way. And I think that's important because if you're just waiting to finish, you're not celebrating there are so many successes along the way. You're finishing your first semester of coursework, finishing all your coursework, finishing your preliminary exam, your comprehensive exam. So I tried to celebrate those small successes. And then I had a few people that I'd call when I ran into writing blocks. I wasn't on campus, but I did with chapter 10, which was my last chapter, I had writing blocks, and they were awful. And so having the few people that I could call and reflect with and talk through, my husband was one of those too, was very helpful. Outcomes from my study, very quickly, my findings validated the literature on the impact of accountability on teachers. They're expected to do more with less time, narrowing of the curriculum, increased testing, making it more difficult to treat students as whole people, to form close relationships with them, leaving less time for recess, field trips, imaginative play, creative projects, decreased sense of autonomy and self-efficacy, culture of fear and anxiety. That's not new. And I don't really know. So how I feel like my study contributed, though, is that had to do with my population and the method that I used, or the theoretical framework. So I studied veteran teachers, and I felt that their perspectives were unique in that despite the recognition that change in education is inevitable, as they had seen over the course of their career with different reforms coming and going, my participants feared that recent reforms were maybe going to be more permanent. And so they were fearful about the future because of that. They also talked about today's teachers having this new normal, that if they don't have the years of experience that my participants had, how will they know anything different, and what does that mean for their future and for dissent, if this is all that they know. So I thought that was interesting. And in the elementary teacher perspective, an increased focus on academics and more paper pencil tasks, and trickle-down effects of, in Ohio, the third grade guarantee, which is a high-stakes test that requires all third graders in Ohio to pass the reading standardized assessment before they can move on to fourth grade. And so how that was affecting kindergarten already. And so that was interesting. And then Carrere, I felt like had specific implications for practice and research. And it, I felt that it showed, I had my participants at the end reflect on the Carrere process and experience and what they thought about it. And they just kind of reiterated the importance of reflection during an era when there is little time to reflect. So I don't know if that's Carrere specifically or if that's just any kind of reflection. Carrere provided them with a tool for interrogating their identity and coming to their own conclusions. And so I felt like I liked that they co-authored their narratives with me, and that they could reach their own conclusions through our conversations together. That was neat to see. Changes I would make, I have a few here, but there would probably be more if I took more time to think about it. I would have fewer participants if I'm doing a narrative project. I did a narrative study, and it came up in my defense, and I totally agreed, and I felt this when I was writing it, that I had 5, so sometimes I felt like I was just covering more than I was really diving deeply into specific things that would come up. And so obviously I would have to skim past some things that my teachers would bring up in interviews. And so I always was conflicted with the choices that I made, and why am I making these choices to talk about these certain things that my teacher participants would share with me over other things. And so that was hard. So I think that if I did this study again, I would do 1, maybe 2 participants and really go deeply into their narratives. So that's a change. And then I think I want to work on my writing, so I felt like a big part of the dissertation is being a writer too. And so to be an outline person, and I can just take an outline and whip out paragraphs, and that's kind of how I did my dissertation, but it's not very aesthetic. And so when thinking about who's going to read your dissertation and the impact that it can have, that's something that I want to work on, is making some tweaks to how I write up research findings to, if I'm going to be doing a narrative study, to make it more like a narrative for the reader. And then, I don't know, something that you said made me think of this. My question was very broad, and you talked about never hating your question. I don't think I hated my question, but I hated how broad it was. I liked it in the beginning because I could just never narrow it down. And I was like, well, at least with a broad question, I'll be able to go here and there, and it's messy, and that'll be okay. But I think it drove me crazy how broad it was. But I will say that I do think that the study gave me ideas for future more specific directions. So that's good. Key relationships, I would say, and I'm not saying this because I didn't have this with my advisor, but I did. But I was typing this up thinking, poor Tom's probably going to think that I didn't feel this way. So Tom Petter was my advisor, and Kathleen was on my committee, and a few others. But I would say that with your advisor, it's really important to make sure you're on the same page. Same page about the direction that you want to head with your research, because everybody's going to have their own different ideas about how they would do the research or how they think you should do the research. Just kind of make sure you're on the same page. How often you want to meet, especially during the dissertation. If you're going to be off campus, you met like monthly or something.
Fairly regularly.
Yeah, we didn't meet that much, but it might have been more helpful had we met more regularly. And this is a big one for me, and the kind of feedback you expect on your drafts. So I didn't have a problem with getting feedback in a timely manner, like you mentioned, but sometimes I wanted less feedback on grammar and more feedback on content. And then solicit, this is something that I would change too, is solicit feedback from committee members early enough in the process so that you have plenty of time to make substantial revisions. For me, I was like, I think everybody's gonna go to the defense and they're going to hear suggested revisions, but I had like 2 weeks before the grad school requires you to upload it to OhioLink. And so that wasn't enough time for me to really go back and dive into some books, and I could have waited and postponed everything until August, but I chose not to do that. So I wish that I would have, instead of just with my advisor, solicited feedback from individual committee members more throughout the whole process. And that's my 2 cents.
Need a break, or are we good?
No, it's,
Okay, great. I'm Chris Taylor, and I work now up at Wright State University in Dayton. And prior to that, I've been at Wright State 2 years. So prior to that, I worked for 8 years here at Miami. Miami was also my undergrad, and by the time I got into the PhD program here, had been a practitioner for close to 20 years. So I had some interesting misgivings about even being back in a classroom, wondering if I could even do it. At the time that I applied to the program and obviously got in, we had a newborn who was a month premature, and a son who was in the hospital over about 2 years with a blood disorder, and my wife had just gotten a new job, which is a great time to just launch into something new like the PhD program. They were still thinking through that decision. We still look at each other and go, was that right? We're done now. But, so a lot of things were going on, even my thinking about getting into the program, but I really knew it's something I'd always wanted to do. It seemed like a great opportunity. I had a relationship with the EDL program as an undergrad here. In fact, I had sought out, I was in the Western program when it was sort of the true Western program here at Miami, the Interdisciplinary Studies program, housed over in the western part of campus. And in part of creating my own sort of path there, had sought out Marcia Baxter Magolda to get some advice, because even by then I knew I wanted to be in student affairs, and was lucky enough when I got back into the PhD program to have her as my advisor temporarily before she retired, and then had Kathy Goodman. So it just felt like a homecoming, and that felt really good. But I also knew I was entering it very much as a practitioner first, researcher second. So that was kind of an interesting road to walk. I was full-time work and family and all that. And I arrived, I will say, I went into the whole experience just assuming that I was going to do qualitative work. I was in student affairs. I enjoyed sitting down with people and talking to them. I worked in student conduct here. I work in student conduct up at Wright State. So I have lengthy meetings where I really kind of try to get to know somebody and why they're making some of the decisions they make, and having me provide them with some of their narrative as to what's going on in their lives that may be causing them to act out or influencing some of their decisions, and where they are developmentally. And I just thought that was the case, and somehow I ended up doing a quantitative dissertation. Yeah, I know. So that probably had a lot to do with, I didn't necessarily have my question very early on, but I think it was the second year of the program during the Foundations to Research course. I happened upon an instrument, a survey that I just fell in love with. It was the male role norms inventory by Levant, who's up at Akron now. And it spoke to me in a way, and the way it had been used in research just really made sense to me. It's not necessarily a measure of masculinity, but it measures one's adherence, male or female, to masculine role norms, all those kind of stereotypical things that we think about or see in the media that are masculine. It measures one's adherence to those. And I just knew that I wanted to do something with that. And I did something with it in that class as a project, and that kind of felt very right. And I knew that, that Kathy had come into the program at that point, and knew that she had done, quantitative work. So I started to have some conversations with her about what that might look like. I also knew that I did not want to do anything working in the world of conduct. It just was what I did every day, and somehow while the data was readily available in front of me in many ways, and at sister institutions, brother institutions across the country, I've got friends who could readily provide me with scads and scads of information and things like that, but it just didn't, I'm not even sure it's my passion, which is strange that I still work in it, but pays the bills, right? I wanted to do something, and I started to think, I think partially being back here after having been on the East Coast for several years, about some of my experiences at Miami, and I started to think about my fraternity experiences at Miami. And if you know anything about the Western program as it existed, you know, before it was sort of dismantled, changed up, things like that, there were not a lot of fraternity men in the Western program. They were sort of, you know, almost counter to each other, that idea. They certainly existed, but I was a little bit of an oddball and an anomaly. I also didn't particularly enjoy my fraternity experience. I didn't quit per se, but I did just sort of stop attending things, and eventually they gave me alumni status, which I'm not even really sure what that meant, but they gave it to me. It just meant I had to pay less, right? I don't think I had to pay at all, so. But I thought about that, and obviously in conduct, getting back into that a little bit, I was doing some work with organizations, including fraternities, as you might imagine. So I started to look at a lot of the things that were occurring, and I also had a realization, even though I didn't want to do work in conduct, that the majority of people I was seeing in my office were people identified as male and men. That's true across the country, and you know, I knew that a lot earlier than that, but you know, started to really think through what all's going on there. So I looked at this survey, and I thought it would be interesting to kind of look at, well, what is that? How does masculinity, or at least adherence to male role norms, play out in the fraternity world? And obviously, you know, well, yeah, those are masculine worlds. I think we all know that, but I hadn't really found anywhere that it had been sort of quantified. Which again, why I ended up doing quant, I don't know, but so I started to look at that. At that time, Marcia had started talking about retiring, or I was already having some conversations with Kathy about quantitative work possibly, and entering into it very trepidatiously, having not really been great at statistics or you know anything like that as an undergrad or a grad student. So, you know, really kind of wondering how I would pull this off, but I arrived that I wanted to do something with organizations, fraternities specifically, and I wanted to look at, first of all, are fraternity men more adherent to male role norms, and I was using it really as a measure of masculinity, and if so, why? So that's what I ended up looking at, and I discovered that, and I gotta be honest with you, I was pretty sure that that would turn out that they would rate higher or more adherent to masculine role norms. And then I looked at about 40 or so predictors of why I thought that might be. Anything from living in the house versus not living in the house, whether they were an officer or not, how many years they'd been in, what year in school they were, just a variety of things.
Race or ethnicity or?
Yes, I'm
yeah.
sorry. I looked at basic demographic data as well, race and ethnicity. Although at the institution I chose,
yeah,
not a lot,
but
yeah,
not a big one, yeah.
not a big lot. But what I looked at when we looked at the data, which I want to pause there and talk about something. Again, not being great at statistics and things like that, I had certainly had those courses in the program, but by the time I did my research, 3.5 years had passed from the time I'd sat in any sort of classroom using SPSS. I don't use it daily in my practice at work. Yes, we do assessment, but not that type, as I'm sure most of you can imagine. So that was a bit of a challenge to try to stay fresh in that. I kind of wish I would have done some things to stay fresh, but I didn't, but I managed. But when Kathy and I looked at the data, we discovered that almost none of those things were predictive. Almost none. There was some that had a slight predictive level, but not really much statistical significance. And what I kind of arrived at, and would need to do additional research to confirm this, was that I think men who choose to be in fraternities are already adherent to male role norms and seek out like-minded people to confirm them, validate them, those kind of things. So it was really interesting because I really had picked out some things that I thought would certainly be predictive. Living in the house versus not living in the house. I didn't live in the house because I was an RA and I needed that to pay for my college. So I never lived in the house. So I just certainly thought some things would, but they did not, almost to a number of the things I picked. So that was very interesting. And another interesting thing is that I had started, I talk about quant versus qual. At some point I did want to do mixed methods, and I will tell you that David Perez talked me out of that. And wow, more power to you, because I'm not worthy. Because what he said to me in class, where I think Marcia had people come in, read some of our work, give us some feedback, was he said, this mixed methods thing, do you want to finish your dissertation? I was like, well, I want to finish my dissertation. It's like, you can do mixed methods some other time. This isn't the last thing you're ever going to write, right? I was like, probably not. So I tell you, his son goes to school where my sons go, and every time, my wife teaches there as well, so every time my wife and he cross paths, she thanks him publicly that, that he talked me out of mixed methods. I ended up surveying, I attempted to survey around 3,000 people, men, and with just about an equal population of fraternity affiliated versus non-fraternity affiliated men. Ended up with a sample of about 900, and that was what I based my study on. So really interesting work. I am gonna try to get an article out of it yet, probably for the American Fraternity Association's Oracle magazine. It's probably about the best place I think it fits. So, kind of loosely working on that. I'll be honest, I did not touch anything academic for quite a while. I just read fiction and other things that I hadn't read in quite a while, caught up on some TV programs. Challenges were everywhere. I called it, a lot of times I referred it to working in the margins, in that, I would go home from work, and at some point, 2 years ago, I added an hour and 10-minute commute to my day, twice. There and back. I mean, an hour in the morning, hour in the afternoon, so that sort of compressed things even more. But even when I was in Miami, I would get home, eat dinner, put the kids to bed, and start studying about 8 o'clock. I don't know about you, but at this point, I was in my mid to late 40s, and I don't function very well starting at 8 o'clock at night, so that was an interesting challenge. But what I arrived at after trying to do that and trying to get into some sort of daily writing practice, well, I first of all discovered I'm not the guy who writes daily. It's just not me. I need to write in big chunks. So my wife was supportive enough and kind enough to, free things up, be able to, take care of the home front and the kids, so I could, essentially sometimes go away for a whole weekend. And sometimes that was, leaving at 8 o'clock in the morning, coming back at 8 o'clock at night. Sometimes it was an overnight. I spent a couple weekends out at Houston Woods, locked in a room by myself. I think I took a walk a couple times just to clear my head, but that's how at least I did writing, and it was really helpful. Once I discovered that, I tried to do some different things, and just it wasn't working at all. Kathy was an amazing asset, and in EDL, or in Sahi rather, she's kind of the quant person. And everybody else is kind of not the quant person. So, there was some interesting conversations on both, and I kept my entire comps committee as my dissertation committee. So that was Mahogany, David Perez, Elisa Avis, Kathleen Kublanka from Family Studies was my outside person, and of course Kathy. And I just had a really good relationship with them in comps and just ended up keeping them. But Kathy, for me, bridged a lot of the gap between explaining, not that they didn't know quant work, of course they do, but, making it clear, well, that's a quant thing. He doesn't need to talk about or won't talk about how he feels about things, because we don't do that. Now, I will tell you, after getting many, many comments, if you read my dissertation, you will see some parts of it that wouldn't normally be in a quant dissertation, and I was okay with that, because a lot of this work was so personal for me. And in fact, I said to Kathy, I said, I'm getting these comments anyway. Would it be out of hand if I just did write a little bit about, my experiences? And she said, well, no, it wouldn't be. There would be some, if you write that in an article, there might be some publications that reject it out of hand because it's not quant. Right. But, she walked me through that, walked them through that, so that was very helpful. And like I said, others along the way gave a lot of great feedback. David Perez, talking me out of mixed methods. But for me, largely, it was my family and my wife. I mean, we call it the family dissertation. We're all getting a dissertation. We all got a dissertation. Oh, the kids got an Xbox, so that was pretty good. In fact, I would leave, be going away to write, and still working on the PhD? Yeah. So we get an Xbox yet? Not yet. We're almost there. We're almost to the Xbox. So that for them, that quantified it, made it work. It explained that I was out, getting them an Xbox, so that was okay with them for the most part. And I will tell you too, I think about this now, sort of doing sort of the aftercare of getting a PhD. I'm doing some relationship repair, and my wife and I are fine. I'm not saying that, but I'm just saying there's some time to be made up for, and the kids as well. So we're about to get teary, but we're kind of working on that and doing some things that we've never done before. In fact, this past spring break, we took a vacation, just the four of us, first time ever. We'd never been anywhere that wasn't visiting a relative or with a relative on a vacation like Disney World. My parents took us, so we did things like that. But and self-care for me too. It's kind of weird. I mean, I'm kind of trying to get to know myself a little again, because I was such a different person for 6 years. So, that's something to think about as well. I mean, getting there is one thing, but there's a whole thing that kind of comes afterwards. And you said imposter syndrome. That just hit me funny because literally at about 4:10 today, when my wife and I were sort of, changing the guard, she got home from work. My kids were sick today, so she took over there, and I was getting dressed, and I said, that imposter syndrome thing is a thing. I have it right now. I don't know what to go say to these people. I have a PhD, and I don't know what to say. So it is definitely a thing. And again, I would stress that, get the PhD, it's great, but think about that aftercare too. That there's something to be said about that.
Yeah.
And I think I'll close with that.
Thank you.
That was so
I would ask, I'm not going to try to get everybody on camera, so if you have a question or a comment, I would just ask that you just try to say it just clearly into the room so that we can capture it for as best we can. And so anybody who wants to make a comment or a follow-up question or, yeah.
First and foremost, congratulations. God bless you guys, because I know it's a lot of work. I'm curious, what was it like the day you walked into that room and had to defend this dissertation, this huge project?
So I'll start and say that by the time you get to your dissertation defense, you've really seen what it's going to be, which was, I didn't know that that's what you were going to see. So when you defend comps, what my experience was for LCC, the comps defense, the proposal defense, and the dissertation defense all sort of feel the same initially. What happens in the room can be different, but it feels the same. So, you all get together, your committee's there, you're probably there early because you're anxious. They are like, oh yeah, we have a thing today, right? You're like, yes, we have a thing today.
We're so compassionate.
That's right. And so you're there, and they come in, and
Are you nervous? I wasn't, but now I am.
now I am.
Yes.
And then they excuse.
Do you want me to turn this off so you can really talk, blast the faculty? I'm okay with that.
No. Then they excuse you from the room, and then they talk about you. And at least in my experience, when I came back into the room each of those times, they told me right away, this is like you've passed, or we feel like you've passed, or whatever, and now we're going to have a discussion. And then the discussion talks about sort of the strengths and weaknesses of whatever work that you've presented in front of them. So the same thing that happened in comps, that happened in the proposal, and that happened in the final defense. What I did not realize with the defense, because and everybody said, you're gonna get feedback, and you're gonna have edits, and blah, blah, blah. And that's true, for real. See the comps defense, at least in LCC, it's very similar for the proposal and the final dissertation defense. I don't know, was your experience the same?
Yeah, it was very similar, and I would echo that. When I walked out of the room, they were like, congratulations, and I was just like, I couldn't feel excited, and I don't know, it took me a few days because it was not a painful meeting at all, but you just, like, my mind was still in the really great feedback, and like, why didn't I think of that? And I just wanted to go back to my computer and make the changes and do some reading and such. So, yeah, but I was gonna say something, but I forgot. So I might add it if I think about it.
I think pretty similar for Sahi in that, you defend your comps, although my comps was just the committee, the dissertation, I had a little bit of a bigger audience, some invited, some that just kind of showed up and was like, all right, we'll roll with it. People I knew and said, very nicely, hey, and they asked, I haven't seen one of these, could I just see one, because I'm gonna have to do one someday. I was like, yeah, at this point, whatever. Actually it was in this room, come think of it.
It's a big deal.
No, it was, and I also trusted that my advisor, and she said she would do this, Kathy, would have come to me and said, yeah, we're not gonna schedule that defense just yet. We had to talk about some more stuff, there's some more writing to be done, some more work to be done after the committee had looked at it for what I had hoped was the last time, which didn't happen, but I kind of trusted that she wasn't gonna let me walk in the room, going there for something that was gonna be incredibly ugly. And I certainly have heard, not really in necessarily educational leadership or here, but other places as well, doesn't tend to be the trend, but certainly I've heard about some defenses that are pure absolute defenses, sword fights almost, and that, you're not sure what's gonna happen when you go in the room. Not here, by any means have I ever heard that. But I trusted that, Kathy wasn't gonna steer me wrong, and that she thought I was prepared, and, yeah, so, nerve-wracking, but it got to be fun, quite honestly. At some point, I just kind of drifted into what I was talking about and enjoyed what I was talking about. And before I knew it, they said, well, could you step out for a couple minutes? I was like, oh, well, all right then. Yeah, so it was good experience.
I remember what I was going to add to that. You reminded me of the having fun. I tried to remind myself before going in that, like, I actually have people to sit here and listen to me talk about my research. Because before that, I'm just people, how's it going? But then you kind of lose them, right? They're not like interested for a couple of minutes, but I have to like, oh, sorry, I was going for 15 minutes because it's so exciting. And so I tried to remind myself, and maybe it'll help you to think about it like that. You have a captive audience. I mean, they're gonna obviously have things to say, but you don't get to talk the whole time. But if you look at it like that, I think that helps too with the nerves to think like, this is my one shot here where I get to go in and talk about all this research that's been floating around in my head. So.
I'll also just say real quickly that there were no gotcha questions. There was some, hey, did you think about doing this? Yeah, no, I didn't. That's a really interesting thing for possibly future research. But there were no gotcha questions. Nobody was out to get me that day. And again, I don't think my advisor would let that happen.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys.
And then there was Kirk.
Yeah.
Well, I wrote my dissertation a while ago, but what I liked and I can still remember it all these years later, but what I liked about what all three of you said was the emphasis on the question. And that your dissertation is about, you have this question that's bugging you about people or institutions or something about education. And then the question's out there buzzing around, and then you sort of find a site in which to apply the question. And I think a lot of times we come into dissertation saying, well, my topic is going to be X, and it's really, the topic is not, that's not like the heart of it, it's the question. And that's the question that really drives you too. So you're thinking about, kids in dissent, this whole time. Like, why don't kids act out? What's the problem with these kids? Why aren't they acting out? And so that's what was buzzing around in your head, and then you found a way to study it. I think that's a real secret.
I think it puts a lot of it, that's how I felt. I knew that the question was so big. And I think that prevented me from getting to the question because I just felt all this pressure, like you gotta like the question. The question is such a big deal, and it was like, I love the question. And my advisor was like, I know your question, I knew it all along. Well, can you tell me my question? Because I don't know it. So yeah, it is big. It's important.
Other comments or reactions or questions?
I'd be interested to hear, you've given some snippets of some of this, but working with so much data, working with so much literature, ways that you kept yourself organized. I know this is going to be different for different people, but what strategies did you use? What advice might you have for others just to keep all this in a place that makes sense? And Chloe, you touched on some of that with your notes, but I'd be interested to hear more.
Yeah, I use Dropbox. I swear by that. You can work on your stuff anywhere. Save it 50 different places. But I used Dropbox, and I had a folder for all my classes and all my reading. All my readings were very organized that way because they were all on the computer. And then once I actually started writing the different chapters, I had chapter folders, and I would keep every draft. I'd save as with a new name so I could go back. And same from comps too, because from comps to proposal I had to cut. I went from 80 to 25 because my advisor wanted my proposal to be shortened. But it was very similar to what I had done for my comps, and so I kept all of comps and all of the changes that I made, as new documents, so that once I could be verbose in my dissertation, I went back to my comps. And so, organization was huge for me, big time saver to be able to find things. And so for me, I used folders in Dropbox, and then had my bookshelf all organized, and that worked for me. But
I think a similar thing. I use Dropbox certainly, and Kathy and I actually had a shared folder on Dropbox, so we could trade stuff back and forth. She would drop in articles on occasion she found or came across.
That's nice.
So that was very helpful. Multiple copies of the data in lots of places, both physically and out there in the cloud, whatever the cloud is. Were very important. And I'll be honest, I'm not a terribly organized person. I had to become one for this just to keep my own sanity, plus get the work done. But yeah, Dropbox was I started with some other things like Evernote and I forget Mendeley or something like that. Didn't work for me, so I just kept using Dropbox and Word and used it that way. I also I sort of had a kit because I sort of did my dissertation on the road in some ways. I was working at home. Didn't work very well at home, by the way. There was many other things to do, but I would work at a friend's studio here in town, and he would just let me come and write, and it was a quiet place to work. Sometimes I would stay up in Dayton and work, so I kind of had a box of sort of some really my basic go-to things I knew I was using, articles, books, so I could kind of, if something, I realized I've got some time here, I'm gonna write, I had it with me most of the time when I could.
I think for me, a lot of the stuff that I used was an electronic resource. I think I'm blessed to have the kind of memory where I can okay, what class was that?
You do.
If I can remember what class, I can just kind of remember stuff. And so I could just kind of go back and pull it. I think the other sort of benefit, I wasn't, my whole process was 4 years. And so things were super fresh still. So I can remember, where I was sitting when Sarah Stitzlin came in to 764 because it wasn't that long ago. And so for me, I think that was really pretty beneficial. And once I started writing about dissent and self-efficacy, things just, once we got to the capstone class for quants, I was basically writing about that stuff for 2.5 years. And so occasionally I was adding a new resource here and there, but once I was sort of writing those things, they were just kind of all there. And so I did have some hard books that I hung on to, and then eventually sent back to the library and then purchased because I was like, these are really good, I should want them forever. But initially, I think a lot of the stuff I was using was just online resources, and I can look in my email and see that I emailed it to myself and then kind of go back to it. I wasn't that organized, but in part because I just could sort of go and recall. We also have in LCC, we have a preliminary comps, and so that was a really good experience because I wrote across the curriculum for my prelims, and it warmed me up for my comps proposal. And then once I got to comps, really comps and then the proposal and then the dissertation are all really kind of the same story. They're just kind of different takes on it. So I do, but anytime I thought I got to a point where I would be really sad if I lost something, I could email it to myself. Sometimes I email it to Kathleen too, just to know it was in cyberspace somewhere in case it got lost. Kathleen's like, oh, that's why he sent me something. I'm like, everybody should have a copy of this because something's gonna happen on my computer.
I would add, this isn't necessarily organizational, but it kind of is. At some point, Kathy gave me a book on how to write a dissertation. And there's hundreds out there if you look. This one was how to write a quantitative dissertation. And I certainly didn't follow everything in it, but it did help me organize my thoughts and certainly organize specifically some chapters. So if you don't have one, maybe seek one out or ask your advisor about what they think. That was very helpful, just to keep in mind, okay, this is really what chapter 3 is about, not all this other stuff I'm thinking about at the same time. So that was helpful.
I think going off of that, and Chloe mentioned this, I also use the EDL published works site, which has dissertations from previous EDL students. I would, Heather Chrisman she's acknowledged in my my acknowledgements because she had done a research, hers was also on leadership, and so I was like, how is she talking about it? How is she introducing it? What does her chapter 2 look like? I know she knows this. I went back to it, so I'm probably 15 of her downloads. I just went back to it because I was like, how long was this chapter? Just questions that I didn't know how to answer. So I think that's another really great resource. And then you can say, who was on her committee and how many of these people are also on my committee? And so maybe this is a style thing. Gary was another one because she had a more quantitative study, and so because so many of our projects are qualitative, and so I was looking for EDL students who had done quant and what kind of take they did. But before I forget, the one thing that I didn't realize, and I told Eric this already, is that when you're writing, once you sort of get to the comps point, you should know that the graduate school wants your final submission in less than two spaces. So 1.5, 1, or single space, because if you write your whole thing and then you turn it in, and it's got your table of contents, they're gonna send it back to you and say, adjust your spacing, which throws off your table of contents and where your charts are and all that stuff. So save yourself time, just start writing in 1.5 now, so then it's all ready for the graduate school.
Yes, the formatting, get the formatting because they have formatting requirements through the grad school. It's very particular. So if you can get that and you can format your chapters, if you do them in separate documents, which I think a lot of people do, or if you just write it all in one document, try to format it that way from the beginning. It will save you time. And I synced my headings in Word to my table of contents, so I could just go to my table of contents. I watched YouTube, I didn't know either. Like, go into my table of contents and click update, and it would just, it loaded them all in. But it took me time up front to figure out how to sync them all. But it was nice because then I could go to my table of contents and click chapter 10, so, this part of chapter 10, and it would take me to that page. Once I dumped them all in the massive document.
Kate, how did we write a dissertation without you two?
I don't know.
We're gonna ask that.
But I do think organization is one thing, and I wonder if any of you had this problem of the chapter organization, which still baffles me when I'm writing stuff. Like, you think you got a topic and you go chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, chapter 4. But then you're in the middle of chapter 3 and you go, wait, maybe this part should be in chapter 2 and that should be in chapter 4. And it's deceptively simplistic problem, but ends up being a very important problem.
Dr. Quantz was really helpful when I was writing for the pre-proposal. We had to do, I don't remember which section, if it was the epistemology, ontology, and methodology or something, I don't know, all ologies.
Yes.
And I was like, he had all these detailed directions, and I said, I don't know if it goes under this one or under this one. He said, the important thing is that it's in there. Like, don't get hung up on where it goes. So I tried to approach my dissertation with that too, because I had like 5 findings chapters because I just did each participant as their own chapter. So it sounds like it's really long, it's not. That's how I chose to do it. And so 1 through 3, though, I would get mixed up, especially 1 and 2. Like, this could go in my lit review, but I feel like it needs to be in my intro too. And so I really struggled, and I just had to say, okay, this is just gonna work. I'm sure I could have done it differently, but I totally noticed that with the first 2 chapters.
Yeah, I didn't, I think it was complicated because I was doing mixed methods, and so there were things that Mahogany would be like, this feels like this is a finding, why is it here? Or Emily would be like, this seems like it's too much reflection and not enough finding, and Kathleen would be like, it's fine. And so I think like looking at your chair being like, is this okay? And your chair's like, yes, it's okay. And he's like, okay, I'm gonna let it.
But Vika did a mixed methods dissertation with an advisor who is quantitatively ignorant. And so we stack and so I'm saying this because I want you to know it's possible. If you stack your committee with some good quantitative expertise and you use them, right? Because we're a little bit quantitative light in EDL, and that is changing. But like, if you want to do something quantitative, let's say with Kate, because you want to do something historical, you might have to put the committee together the right way, and not, your advisor may not have all the they definitely won't have all the answers, but they may not have all the expertise. But as long as everything you need is in the committee, then you're going to be good. So I wanted to just point that out. Other comments or questions or anything?
This is very helpful.
Yeah, thank you guys.
We're in a lot in our process.
One paper away from finishing first year. One paper away from finishing first year.
I'm like about 6 sentences away from finishing. I said finish my window chapter.
People here are at lots of different places. I mean, in the process. So we have a nice representation of,
Turned in my capstone last night.
Okay.
Waiting to hear back from everyone.
I better email Tom. That's on Tom, that's not me.
Let me know how I can facilitate that process.
Mentioning it in our public spaces.
Sure. On camera.
Okay, a question. Apart from your publication on the Ohio link, what are your next steps like? I mean, are you looking forward for some miniature publications of your dissertation and a couple more publications out of it? Or I mean, did you do that planning as you were writing the dissertation, or?
I think that would have been a great thing to do. I compartmentalized my life. Well, I did the program in 3 years, and so that's the only way I could do that. We were moving this summer, and so I just like had this very specific timeline when I started the program. And so no, I did not. But I am excited that we have the Prairie Exchange, and my dissertation used Prairie, so I will, I do have that goal, and I'm thinking about submitting something to the curriculum of pedagogy. So yeah, I have some ideas, but no, I'm not one of these people that finished with a manuscript too. No, I would have loved that, and I wasn't really working on, I did a publication, and then the curriculum windows, chapter 2, but during my coursework, I felt like it was maybe a little bit easier, but I don't know.
I also was really pretty focused on just finishing the dissertation. I do think about sort of the interesting conversations that I'd still like to have about the data, and where there might be a space for those. I'm an administrator right now, and so it's one thing to be enrolled in a program and to be working towards that end, and to also be working full time and feel like, okay, these two things have to happen concurrently. Now that they don't have to happen concurrently, I can take some more time and think about, how do I want to spend my time? I think Chris makes a good point about family balancing. And just recently, I want to say last week, so I defended in February, and just last week, I felt like the world was brighter again. I'm like, oh, like I'm back, like I can ask questions. I caught up in my email for work, like there were just things and I was doing my job and I was taking care of I was doing those things, but sort of to be really able to focus on those things, I just kind of feel like that just started happening again. Because again, you defend, and then there's edits, and then there's graduate school stuff, and then there's making sure you're hitting all the other deadlines. So I just sort of started feeling like, okay, I can be back into it. I'd written a few things in the fall on LinkedIn, and I'm just trying to maybe get back into that sort of that writing. But there's some interesting stuff in my dissertation. I'd love the opportunity to write more about it and to engage in more conversation about it. So hopefully that won't fall too far away. But for now, I'm just gonna graduate.
Yeah, similar as I said before, I'm looking at the American Fraternity Advisors Association research magazine, and possibly presenting at their conference as well. But I'm looking at it pretty loosely. The idea right now, telling my wife, hey, I need some time to write this article. I'm not going to do that right now. So I will probably wait till summer. We're in summer, but late summer. So yeah.
Summer in 5 years.
Yes, but I don't think that long, because I would hate to get that far away from it and pick it up again and go, I don't want to do this. So yeah, but sometime soon, I hope. But not now, not this week.
We've got about 15 more minutes left scheduled, so I think I'm going to break it up, and if you have, it would be time to ask individual questions or whatever of anybody, of each other or the panelists, and finish up the food. So thanks for coming, and if you want to follow up with email to any of these people, and you want to be in touch with them, let me know if you don't already have their email, and thanks for coming, and finish the pizza, please.
Thanks very
And
much.
thank you to our panelists.